So you could go to China, is a good example. There's some, fantastically important intellectuals in China, and they can intellectually make a better case for why China is better for the people of China than a liberal democracy would be. And in some ways, even objectively, they might be onto something, right? Because Chinese people are undoubtedly being dragged out of, impoverishment by the Chinese state. In numbers unknown historically, unprecedented. And one of the reasons why they've been able to do that is because they've never had to deal with opposition.
Right. Welcome to Conversations with Peter Boghossian. Today I'm here with the Baroness, Claire. So you excuse my ignorance, ignorant American, but what is a Baroness?
So in the United Kingdom, the second parliamentary chamber that makes the law is the House of Lords. The House of Lords in the UK is unelected. It's absolutely huge. It's the second largest second chamber in the world, second only to China. And you get in the House of Lords now through being appointed. And so it's completely anti-democratic. It was full of people who were hereditary lords because it was the old nobility. And now I think there's only the law now is that there's only about 40 or 60 of them. They have to kind of get elected from the old hereditary peers. And then everyone else are political appointments. So I was made a member of the House of Lords, and when you join the House of Lords, you become a Baroness.
Oh, really? So it's a title that you're given. So you're appointed. Who appoints you?
Yeah, so it's political parts of the Prime Minister and the people who run the country do. But then when they leave office, they're also allowed to appoint people. But then they have to offer the opposition leaders the opportunity to bring in people as well, not as many. And I mean, it's the most unlikely thing in the world that I'd be a Baroness. I'm not a Baroness material, but I'm now a legislator, and it's a very serious job. So a lot of people will get their appointments, but they'll see it like as a club where they can meet people for dinner, and other people will just see it as a title. But you're a peer. That's the word for both male and female. And I'm known as a working peer because I actually do read the laws, speak all the time, and
so it's not like you're not a member of the monarchy then?
No. Anyone who's from the UK is listening to this will know that I'm not. I've got a common accent, a working class accent.
Not received pronunciation?
No, but I'm not from the aristocracy, even remotely. So, but there are aristocrats in there, but it's the old aristocratic second chamber that's been turned into. So I have argued forever that we should abolish the House of Lords. So that might sound very odd that I accepted a peerage, but that I still think we should abolish the House of Lords. It needs to be an elected second chamber.
Okay, hold on a second. I'm just trying to figure. So Baroness has nothing to do with the monarchy?
No.
What is a Viscount? Does that have to do with the monarchy?
They are usually the old aristocracy. But there are Viscounts in the House of Lords because they're hereditary peers who were made lords by the Queen or the King in the olden days. But even now, the Prime Minister would have to send a list of who they wanted to bring into the House of Lords to the King or the Queen. But they wouldn't know who it was. Whereas in the old days, you were given your peerage, usually with a massive, castle. Yeah. Because you fought a war or you were on their side in some row, whatever. That's the old aristocracy.
What's a duke?
They're aristocrats as well. I mean,
Are they related to the monarch?
They're not related to. The monarch will have... Some of them are related to the monarch, but most of them, God, I am not the expert on this subject. I want everyone to know. Most of the aristocrats in this country were made aristocrats by the king in a period pre-democracy, when there was no democracy. And the monarch ruled, and then ruled with dukes and these people, right? And the lords. But there was a revolution. And a civil war in which the commoners, led by Cromwell, this is the worst history lesson you ever get.
That's okay, it's better than...
Basically said, you're not getting away with this. It was the start tide of the democratic moment. And so So the commoners took over and set up the House of Commons for the commoners, and said to the House of Lords, you can stay, but you're only second to us. You can stay as a second chamber, but we are now in control.
So people don't have to bow to you then.
No, they don't. But,
do they bow to the king though?
No, yeah, but I'm not. No, this is the House of Lords. However, this is the bit, because of the historical circumstances that the Lords exists in. When you are in the House of Lords, the people who are there, like the staff and all of those people, do behave as though you're some kind of. So they will say, "Lady Fox, good morning, Lady Fox. How are you, Baroness Fox?" They would never call you by your first name. And a lot of the other people in the House of Lords, we don't refer to each other by first name. But I've only been in there for 2.5 years. This is new to me. And let me tell you, it's got nothing to do with the aristocracy.
And you've never bowed. Have you ever bowed to anybody here on the island?
Yes. I mean, you do. You actually bow when you go into the House of Lords, into the chamber every day.
You bow to the...
You bow in, and you're meant to be bowing to the sort of the state, to the state.
Yeah.
Right? And also, if you swear an oath, which every MP, not the elected and the unelected, have to swear an oath to the king or the queen in this country. So we are not citizens, we're sovereign citizens. We're not equal citizens.
I could talk to you, literally I could talk to you. I find this to be utterly fascinating.
Yes, there are other people who are better experts.
But just real quick before we begin. So what does the oath say? Do you pledge your life to the king?
You pledge your allegiance to the
So if the king told you, take a gun in there and start shooting all these people, you would have to do it.
You'd have to breach your oath, presumably, because you would be unlikely.
But you took an oath.
Yes, I know, but I'm saying the oath, like if you join something like the Girl Guides or the Brownies or the Scouts, I don't know if you've heard of these little kind of things. You swear an oath, right?
But that's different from an oath to the king.
No, I know, but to the king. These are often. Well, I did it when I was like in the Brownies, and it was a crisis in our family because I'm from an Irish family, and my mum and dad didn't really want me to be swearing an oath to the British state and the king and queen, but that's what you do. And there's a lot of that in this country. I'm not being glib about it. I'm just saying it's highly unlikely that the king would ask me to take up arms. But if you want, that's what the idea is. It's a nation thing. So, for example, if the king called on the nation to take up arms against Nazi Germany,
but the nation didn't sign an oath to the king.
No, but there's an implicit contract in there with the nation. And I'm saying that I would either have to tear up the oath. If I didn't believe in why I was being asked to go and shoot people, then I wouldn't do it.
But you shouldn't have signed the oath then.
Yeah, but I agree with you that signing an oath is what people do. Every MP in this country has done it. The king does not run this country, though. We live in a democracy, not in the olden days. But there is an oath of allegiance to the king, but the king is below, constitutionally, the elected representatives in the House of Commons and the parliamentary system in general. And we know that because the royal family lost in the Civil War and one king had his head cut off and there was a revolution and parliamentary democracy was set up. So we no longer feel as though and the king constitutionally can't interfere in political matters.
Right.
So it's more of an honorific than it is that phrase.
So I asked somebody, and then we'll begin in a minute. I asked someone if the king walked into a store and stole something cost $1. The translation of that is £1.
Yeah.
And he got caught on camera, and multiple eyewitnesses saw him. Could he be arrested by the police? And the answer is yes, right?
Yes.
So the king is not above the law. Even the king is not above the law.
No, he's not above the law. He's not above Parliament. But the reason why it's controversial, it's not that controversial in this country, but there are anti-monarchists. And I, broadly speaking, would think that we would be better without a monarchy because it would clarify the fact that we are citizens, not subjects.
Okay. All right. So I want to drill down on this liberal democracy because this is a topic that interests us both. And I'll be doing a 4-hour deep dive with Helen Pluckrose on liberalism and liberal democracy. Liberal democracy is compatible with Islam.
Where am I?
You agree.
Yeah.
Tell me why.
Because liberal democracy is able to accommodate religions of all sorts with views that are illiberal and intolerant. There are arguments about whether Islam is a particular type of religion that's, kind of
Fundamentally incompatible with Western democratic values
Yeah,
and
but
civilized society.
But I would say that, if you drill down into Christianity, you could end up with the same argument depending on which sect you ended up in. I do know that Islam didn't have a reformation, but it's not as though I think that, the Christian Reformation was necessarily all a good thing, or that, I think that's an excuse for saying, it's compatible with this religion. The big problem for liberal democracy is it's forgotten how to tolerate intolerance on the one hand, and it's interpreted toleration, that very important Lockean notion, as agreement, right? So there's no particular reason why the radical Islamist thought has been allowed to fester and grow amongst young people in this country, other than the fact that the liberals wouldn't have the row. And anyone who tried to have the row with those young people was accused of being Islamophobic, closed down, or what have you.
All right, so I have a question. So there was a famous case, I'm pretty sure it's in Canada, it was a few years ago, in which I've never seen one here, but I'm pretty sure you have to have them here. Seeing eye dogs for blind people? You must have those. Yeah. In which a blind man wanted to catch a cab at the time. I don't think there were Ubers or Lyfts. And the Muslim cab driver denied him entry because he had a dog. And he tried to get another cab, but almost all the cab drivers were Muslim. Muslim cab drivers must pick up blind people and their dogs, even if it's against their religion. Okay, now I find this fascinating. Why are you on slightly, I'm on strongly agree. Why are you on slightly disagree?
Because I think that there's also a case in which you can choose to do business with who you do business with, right? So I would defend the right of bigots to, so we had an instance, there's a big case here, where somebody comes in and says, "Oh, we want you to make the wedding cake for us, and we're a gay couple."
Oh yeah, you had that. We had that issue.
A gay wedding cake, right?
Yeah.
And the Christian proprietors of the shop said no, and then there was a big fuss. It went to court, right? So you could say, "Well, they're just bigots, right?"
Well, they are bigots.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You can say that they're just bigots, but they own the shop. They can decide who they serve, right? Potentially, you can say, "I don't want to go to this." You have the ability to turn people down. So it's difficult. So the slightly disagrees on all of these things. You always have to think about discrimination, and obviously, and we have changed the way we. I actually don't mind knowing who the bigots are, by the way, but there will be people, and you could put it the other way around. If I was organising an event and a group of known racists tried to buy tickets, I might think twice about selling them to them, right? I might think, and I would think, do I want that lot coming open racists, known racists, right? Do I want them? I mean, you might say Islamist, extremists, right? Or choose your favourite hate person of the moment, right? And I believe in open debate, but if I knew that there were troublemakers that are going to come along, I'd think about it. And it's my event, I can decide, right?
So I'm going to push back on that. This is one of the reasons I'm on the strongly agree. Because if you're blind, that's an immutable characteristic. If you're in a situation in which the overwhelming majority of cab drivers are Muslim, and you need to catch a ride home, and you cannot catch a ride home, then there is that is radically disanalogous to the cake, because you'll be just fine if you don't get two dudes on your cake. You're not going to lose any sleep. You're not going to have the risk of physical injury, falling down. You're blind. Like, that's the gold standard for. Well, I suppose being quadriplegic is the gold standard, but it's close to the gold standard for a vulnerable population as one could reasonably come. It would seem to me that liberalism has the famous Popper's tolerance of intolerance from 1945. It would seem to me that
Yeah, but I disagree.
that liberalism, we need to demarcate the lines of when we are tolerant and when we are intolerant.
Yeah, but I'm suggesting a broader toleration of all and in all circumstances. But you also made an assumption there, which I think is the wrong assumption.
Please.
Which is that I do not think all Muslim taxi drivers wouldn't take the blind person with the dog. Because to be honest with you, if all Muslim taxi drivers wouldn't take blind people with dogs, we'd have heard a lot about it internationally as a major issue, right? There will be, in other words, some religious fundamentalists who are taxi drivers who may have a particular literal interpretation of something, and that might be the case. So I'm saying that because if you look at in any religion, and Islam is no exception to this, there will be all sorts of peculiar rules if you read the Old Testament or if you interpret it in a particular way.
Like mixed fibers in Leviticus.
Have nothing to do with women who've got their period, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you can tell, don't bring them in your taxi, whatever. There will be people, don't let's even think about it, right? There's all sorts of things. But in general, that wouldn't happen. In fact, a lot of religious people who do not believe in homosexuality, that's part of their tenets of their faith, which you just write them all off as bigots, right? But that's part of, at the moment, what their faith says, and that's of all shapes and sizes. Generally speaking, probably take gay couples in the back of the cab, and some of them will end up saying, no, you can't get in because I don't approve, but a lot of them do because it's their business. I mean, they want the money. So I'm trying to say, you also have to not create a social problem where there is none. So, you know, beyond the game, if there was a mass outbreak of no blind people being able to get cabs from Muslim drivers,
what would you do?
Then that's when society has to have a discussion. And you either say, this is an example of toleration, we're going to change the law that you have to. But I'd be very uncomfortable. I'd recruit some more taxi drivers.
Yeah.
My point here is we're always looking for the intolerant to be intolerant of at the moment. That's the shift that's happened. People are forever looking for those people who do not fit in to this sort of consensual view. And I think that you have to be free. Part of freedom means that you have to be free in a way to make judgments, and some of those judgments will be considered to be discriminatory. And there's all sorts of examples of that. The right to association is where you basically exclude people. So, you know, the right to association is not just like, I'm setting up this small group of people here. You don't then, and then somebody says, well, why won't you let me join? It's like, well, because I want these people in, it's my group, go away. That's part of freedom of association. People, when I organise a conference, no one is entitled to speak on a panel. People say, what about my free speech? Why aren't you inviting me? It's like, that's not a free speech issue. So I think that, for me, can't we try and emphasise that, broadly speaking, right, there is an atmosphere of toleration that does not equate with approval. And this is also really important, because in this country, what's happened is the word tolerance has been corrupted to demand that we affirm and approve. So you don't, why? I mean, I can be tolerant of you know, Muslims whose faith I completely disagree with or whose practices I disagree with, but I'm prepared to tolerate them in society. It doesn't mean that I have to kind of agree with them or pat them on the head and say how wonderful they are, which is almost what happens. The other thing is, in a secular society, that religion is not something which should trump that secular society, but it's being allowed to. And the irony in the UK is that you were asking me about the royal family and the Church of England, state and church.
Yeah.
There's a good example, which is the National Trust. The National Trust is a huge charity in this country that is responsible for all the stately homes and all of the great buildings and of England. And there's a lot in this country, right?
Yeah.
This is an old country. People go to National Trust houses, you know, to these big grand houses for cups of tea, walk around the gardens, buy the jam. They're usually owned by aristocrats. They're in charge of their keep. They've just brought out a calendar. And in the calendar, it mentions every single religious festival, right? It also has LGBTQ plus month. It's got, race, it's got, you can imagine Black History Month. It's got every single right.
I can imagine.
It has not got Christmas and Easter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is one of those stories that you think somebody has made it up to prove the world has gone mad. But it's not made up. It's true. They're embarrassed about the big Christian, and they seem to be embarrassed, or they haven't put them in. Why have they not put them in? And then they've treated as a new religion LGBTQ plus month as though somehow that's the significant thing for a calendar. And so I'm saying that I'm prepared to tolerate, and I do. I tolerate perfectly reasonably people who put themselves in the QT plus category or any of these things. Get on with it. I am not prepared to accept or affirm, because a woman is a woman, a man is a man, a trans woman is not a trans woman is a man and not a woman. And then I draw the lines, as society often does, for what happens to children, because we have a different duty of care, and that's not the same.
Capitalism and the profit motive is an effective tool for de-radicalization.
Capitalism and the profit for de-radicalization. Where am I? I don't
You disagree, and I slightly
yeah,
agree.
but I'm not sure what's been got at there.
Well, I was specifically thinking about our conversation about Muslim cab drivers, and I was thinking about the fact that people who, the data, I'm not an expert on this, but from my understanding of the data, when people come to a country with a skill, they're more likely to effectively integrate into society than if they don't. And Australia being the paradigmatic case of that.
I do disagree. I think that there's some, the benefits of progress certainly help people. The benefits of progress and the profit motive, if you want capitalism, is that if you live in a more affluent society, you have more time, you're more likely to be introduced to a wide variety of views. If you're, for example, you come from an agrarian society where you're literally ploughing the fields manually 14 hours a day, you know, the idea that you have had the opportunity to sit and read a book, never mind the literacy to do so, or to go to an art gallery, or to discuss these, or to play games like this, it just won't have happened to you, right? So obviously, if you're introduced into a wealthier society, that can immediately change your perception. And by the way, when you're ploughing the fields and all the rest of it, sometimes those when you're talking about radicalization, you can be bestowed upon you ideas that are religious that you never have time to think about or reflect on. And so obviously, historically, often people who become part of the modern world, they've changed even the way they practice their religion, right? Or they lose their religion if we were talking about religion, but it's not just that. They have a different attitude because they are introduced to a new world, yeah?
Okay.
But it's not that they necessarily have to have skills. I don't know if it's the profit motive. They're just introduced to the modern world,
okay,
which they have been basically living in some medieval concept of the world because they've been unfortunate enough to be in places that haven't got the great gains that we've had from modernity.
So that is fascinating to me, which leads me to my next question. If every country in the world tomorrow became a liberal democracy, the world would be better off.
Yes.
You don't strongly agree?
Yeah,
Why do you strongly agree?
Well, it's obvious. I think it's the brilliant way of organising society, and I think that we would have a lot less problems. But as I said earlier, the problem now is that even the concept liberal democracy has been so corrupted that I think we maybe have to say,
right,
it's eaten itself, and so we may have to think about that.
I'm going to throw you a curveball,
yeah,
Baroness.
Yeah.
You ready?
Yeah.
It is possible through artificial general intelligence that a super AI will develop a system better than liberal democracy. You disagree and I'm neutral. Why do you disagree?
Well, because I think that what's happened in relation to how we view artificial intelligence is that we've lost faith in humanity, in the human capacity. And we either do this by thinking that AI is going to be better than us because we've lost faith in ourselves, even though we created it, or because we're frightened that it's going to be better than us because we no longer feel that we can solve problems and see it as a threat. So there's those aspects. It's not strongly disagree, because it's also possible that, not when you say a better version, it's also possible that the aspects of artificial intelligence that can just almost randomly throw up ideas, or write a novel that's not really a novel but might have some good bits in it. It might be feasible that in the midst of all that verbiage, somebody could say something, but it would have to spark an idea in a human for them to say, do you know what? Even though it's a bit bonkers, maybe we as humans could think about this liberal democracy plus X or something, that it said, why don't we try it? But we'd have to do it. They're not going to come up with all right. It's not going to come up with
I have another curveball question for you. Let's say that at some point in the future, and Nick Bostrom is predicting a singularity in about a year's time. Let's say at some point in the near future, maybe even sooner than we expected, we develop a kind of artificial intelligence that's almost inconceivable to us. And in the course of doing that, or immediately subsequent to that, it solves mathematical problems no one's been able to solve. It solves the game of chess. It comes up with the cure for all these different types of cancers. And then, to everybody's astonishment, it lays out the principles for a system of a better form of governance than liberal democracy, which, when you read it, it seems completely bizarre. I mean, just bonkers, to use your word. Should people follow that system?
Well, how do you do should they?
Should they follow the system?
If I strongly disagree, am I saying they should?
They should follow the system that the AI let.
So I disagree that I strongly disagree that they shouldn't.
I'm on the neutral.
Right. So first of all, you're comparing apples and pears. Scientific breakthroughs like cancer or mathematics are entirely feasible for major inroads to be made through the use of artificial intelligence. Although even then, the interaction, particularly with medical cures, has to be with humans, and it will have to be seen as to whether something that really seems to crack something has to be tried out on the humans that you're trying, you can't solve cancer over there in that way. But anyway, even more than that, if you, in this sense, humanity is not a game. It might come up with a completely, and you think, well, it solved the problem of cancer. So if it's suggesting this is a better version of liberal democracy, well, we've got to go with it. Well, first of all, you give up your autonomy. So you've immediately made yourself less of a human being. I mean, you'd be an idiot, right? Secondly, the point about organizing society is it's not a plan. You don't have a plan. You don't go, oh, I've got a roadmap. I mean, people might try and do this, but I've got a roadmap. You might say, well, it solved the problem of cancer. It's come up with something that looks ludicrous, but we should consider it. And then what you do is you gather people together and talk about it, and you think, is there anything in this? That's what I was saying to you. It might come up with something. Is there anything in it? But you shouldn't act on it autonomously. I mean, like an automaton, because that turns you into a machine. And secondly, because society requires to be built. It's not something that you can impose something on. Of course, there have been examples of where people have tried to do that. That's what the Nazis did. That's what authoritarian regimes, I mean, they have a kind of blueprint. They try and impose it on. Usually, the problem with that blueprint, where they say, we've come up with a better plan, right, requires that you then deal with the people who won't go along with that plan. Because, you say, well, this is the better plan. We know it is, and we're going to make you do it. We're going to force you to do it. The only way that society changes for the better is when you actually have an idea that captures the imagination of people in society in such a fashion that they then start to argue and agitate for it and start to say, this is the way forward. We've realized, and that's why I was trying to say earlier that I don't want to say that liberal democracy is it, because I don't want to rule out the possibility of better ways of organizing, particularly now that we've seen the problems of liberal democracy in as much as it's not able to be liberal or democratic. So maybe there are ways that we can majorly improve this, or even with a different name and slightly different way of organising society, I'd be with you on that. But that would still be something that you'd have to convince your fellow citizens on. You'd still have to go out and argue. You'd still have to go and say, look, surely it would be better to do this. And you may or may not work that, but that's how society's changed, through people going out and winning arguments with their fellow citizens.
Christianity is worth believing merely because it is useful. We both strongly disagree. Why do you strongly like Ayaan Hirsi Ali's recent letter with Unheard?
I mean, talk about an insult to Christianity, by the way. If you have any notion of what faith is, it has to be believed. It's a struggle. And even though I'm not religious, I have some respect for the religious struggle that people go through in order to find their relationship with God, with Jesus, with Allah, with whoever, right? This isn't like something out of nothing. And I'm an atheist, right? But the idea that you go, but the idea that you can then go, but I can recognize what they're saying, right?
Yeah.
And the idea that you can go, well, as an atheist, I think that's a handy thing. I'll just grab that. It makes a mockery. Also, it seems to me, makes a mockery of politics. It's like dressing up. It's like cosplaying. I mean, why would you do that, right? You can take aspects of religion and say, well, I understand why that's been an important cement in society over the years.
Yeah.
But goodness me, we've moved on from saying that we need that. Right. And of course, this is yet once more a disillusion with the modern project. I mean, I think as well, the reactionary feminists are doing the same. I mean, they've thrown, like you've had Louise Perry, they call themselves a reactionary feminist rather than I am. But, people like Louise Perry, who basically, read her and Harrington's work, and I understand what they're saying. But, the sexual revolution was a fantastic step forward for women, right? But that doesn't mean that everything about it was good for women. Right. But the idea of going back to predate it in some sort of halcyon days, not for me.
Hope requires a respect for the truth.
Yeah.
You're in agree?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm agree or strongly agree, I suppose.
Liberal democracy requires a respect for the truth.
Yeah.
I'm on strongly agree.
Yeah.
You on strongly agree?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know why I'm even hesitating particularly. I mean, I don't want to be a purist in as much as I think that I do understand that historically people can tell lies for good reasons. That's my only hesitation.
Believing in a hopeful story is required for society to survive and thrive.
Where are we? Agree. However...
Slightly agree, but I could be persuaded to move to agree.
Well, I think the caveat is this. It's not just a story. I suppose the greatest enemy of liberal democracy, it seems to me, is despondency and fatalism, where people think there's no choice and that they can't act as history makers.
Yeah.
So in that sense, hope is a great antidote to that.
Yeah.
But it can't be it's not a kind of see the light hope, or it can't be a boosterish hope. In other words, we have to convince people that they have the capacity. I think one thing that people have lost faith in is they think, oh my God, things are so bad, we can never get out of this trough, yeah? And I've got no power to get out of it. Whereas obviously, history has changed in a second, historically in countries, right? And that things don't stay the same. Change at the moment, actually, change is very much in the air. But if you feel as though you're constantly being done to, rather than have any capacity to act, i.e., that agency question is very key here.
Yeah.
So that's the hope is in agency, rather than the hope over there.
What's the relationship between agency and liberal democracy?
You can't have liberal democracy without agency. You need to have people who see themselves as responsible for the fate of their society and their lives. They have to have some buy-in. And you were talking about integration before, and this was in a different context. But one of the things that used to happen, particularly with immigrants that would come to this country, for example, historically, was partly a mythologized version of, England as the kind of mother home. There was quite a lot of that, ironically, post-colonial. There was both a destroy, get them out of our country, but there was also, but we love the Queen. So there's like thousands of people who come from the Caribbean, and they'd be like, and then they were treated like dirt, because they were black. So it's like a really odd clash. But the thing was, what they did buy into, and this was even true of my parents coming from Ireland, was they saw the UK as, they believed in the values of the country that they were coming to, that was a modern world. I mean, you talk to people from the Indian subcontinent about why they moved to the UK, why they wanted to, as people from an old colony come here, was because they really believed that this was a place they could make their lives. They could improve their lives. They weren't being done to. They could come here and start again and make something of themselves, and often did. Their kids would often do really well at school, even though they were subject to racism often in this country. They would then overcome that and really say, we're guests, we're new here, but we're going to really, we're part of the United Kingdom. You'll meet people who believe in the United Kingdom more than anything else, and Western values, civilizational values, enlightenment, so on. So you have to have a sense of your own agency in order to buy into a bigger story. Otherwise, you're just propagandized, and it's just a dogma, and you never believe it.
If you could be given a really good argument for why human agency isn't as important as you think it is, like a really convincing, compelling argument, would that change your view of liberal democracy?
The problem is that it wouldn't change my view of human agency. So there.
So your belief in human agency is not rational then?
I suppose it's a bit like saying, if you could be given a really compelling and convincing argument about the problems of liberal democracy, would you change your view?
Of course I would.
No, well, what I'd say is that it's got lots of faults, and you can have a very compelling argument about the problems of it. But it's not to say that it's not got huge benefits. And you can't destroy those just by having somebody putting a good argument. So you could go to China, is a good example. There's some, fantastically important intellectuals in China, and they can intellectually make a better case for why China is better for the people of China than a liberal democracy would be. And in some ways, even objectively, they might be onto something, right? Because Chinese people are undoubtedly being dragged out of, impoverishment by the Chinese state. In numbers unknown historically, unprecedented. Right. And one of the reasons why they've been able to do that is because they've never had to deal with opposition.
Right.
They basically say, we're building this city whether you like it or not, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
The reason I'm saying that is because, is that a compelling argument against liberal democracy? Or is freedom something, freedom maybe rather, you keep talking about liberal democracy. For me, it's freedom, right, is the core value at the heart of freedom and agency are my two things.
Okay, so because freedom is at the core of liberal democracy, and for you, freedom is inextricably tied to agency, if you couldn't really give an argument against agency because you'd be giving an argument against freedom. Yeah. And both those are a priori values. Those are kind of apodictic starting values.
All I'm saying to you is that you can make an argument against freedom that would mean that people are less free. It might be a brilliant logical argument, but I believe that people should be free. You can make an argument against agency and say that actually people are better suited to being organized by some external force rather than you trying to develop their agency so that they can take control of their own fate and their own lives. And I'd say, but I want them to. There might be a brilliant argument. The reason I was using China was you can make an argument that objectively, according to the data, society is much better when you don't have democracy because you haven't got these stupid voters keep voting the wrong way and doing silly things and getting in the way. But I happen to think that I would prefer to be free, have not just me, free, have agency and make mistakes and society not be as developed if you were in that situation. Because, slaves do build things faster and better, right? But freedom matters beyond that, yeah, I think women should be free.
Reason and rationality is the best way to justify the value of liberty. Reason and rationality is the best way to justify the value of liberty.
Yeah. I only agree, not strongly agree.
Yeah, I'm strongly agree.
Yeah. My only reservation, I mean, reason is because reason and rationality have become seen rather technocratically. And I do think that there is a real role for emotional engagement in these issues. This is not necessarily your interpretation of reason and rationality. But when people sort of say, show me the evidence, you know, that kind of a way.
Yeah.
I think that what they're trying to do is to turn arguments around politics and I suppose around choices and interests, yeah? And to make them into kind of like a mathematical problem. And I think that even just as we saw post-Enlightenment where the romantics were a bit like, don't go mad, you know what I mean? Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
And a little bit, just have that little hesitation.
Yeah. Relying solely on reason and rationality is a slippery slope to technocracy. For example, just follow the science.
Yeah. So
I'm disagree or slightly agree. Why?
Well, why do you disagree on that one?
Relying solely on reason and rationality is a slippery slope to technocracy.
Oh, no, I slightly disagree, sorry.
Oh, you slightly. Oh, why did
I'm
you
over
move?
here.
Well,
No, I just when you said it again, I realised.
Oh,
that,
yeah.
It's more the game aspect. I'm just getting rather than I change.
Yeah, how's the game going for you?
I'd prefer to be sitting having a conversation, but carry on.
I love that. Carry on. That's a very English thing to do. I know, even though you're from Ireland, you adopted the ways of your new country. So relying on reason and rationality is a slippery slope to technocracy. Well, what do you mean by technocracy?
Well, the big question of our recent past has been the people have tried to take politics out of politics and have been anti-ideological. And the post-ideological age, following the collapse of the Berlin Wall largely, but you know, it's not as simple as this, was to say, oh, there are no interests anymore. There's only one way of organising society. It's just a managerial matter. And so you therefore consider who are the best managers. And one of the things that has happened in that actually has been the scientism that we've seen of late, because then you get politicians who say, well, oh, it's not about what I think. I've gone and I've spoken to 3 PhD students and a professor, and they've said the evidence shows this. And one of the problems then is there's no argument because they wave the papers at you and they say, no, the science shows. So this, they use that to ring fence off whole areas of social and political and economic policy from debate, because they'll say the evidence is in.
Oh, from debate.
From challenge, yeah? So they'll say,
yeah, that's
think about climate change, a good example, when they say the science shows there's no debate.
Yeah.
Right? And then they start reorganising society around this, right? And you're not allowed to challenge it at all. No debate. And then they try and accuse you. So it's quite technocratic in the way they do it. That's what I'm saying. So I'm just saying that is, and they say, and this is the question was about reason and whether reason and rationality leads here. That's why I was being anxious over there and not strongly agreeing and only agreeing, because the interpretation of what reason and rationality is these days is to try and take us down the technocratic route and the managerialist route and the evidence shows route. And I think that has been very destructive of political engagement and open discussion.
Enlightenment humanism is the best set of ideas and values for individuals to flourish. Okay. If someone were standing on the strongly disagree, I'm not, but if someone were, what do you think their argument would be for that? Why would they be against Enlightenment humanism?
Because they'd say that Enlightenment humanism, a common argument is Enlightenment humanism led to the death camps, and that it was humanism that was actually the use of reason removed from any counters to it that led us into saying a scientifically organised society, scientific socialism, like Nazis. So I've heard that quite a lot.
Okay, so what is your best argument for why Enlightenment humanism is the best set of ideas and values for individuals to flourish?
Enlightenment humanism was where society got to a point where it realized, not it, but the great philosophers, but nonetheless, society in general was able to share the insight of that way of looking at the world. That meant that humans had the capacity to shape their destiny, that they were no longer, for example, in the feudal system where everybody knew their place, king at the top, serf at the bottom. You had no capacity to change the position that you were in society or to change anything about society. So Enlightenment humanism actually created the individual, because it created for the first time ever the notion that each and every individual was a valuable person in society. And so all of the great philosophical, ideals that I espouse, such as equality or freedom, or all of these things, really consolidated themselves in that period and emerged.
I have a curveball question for you. How many people in the House of Lords?
Oh, there's I don't know, 700 or 800 or something.
Here's the claim. If every year they randomly chop the head off of one person in the House of Lords, I would still want to remain a member of the House of Lords.
So, you see, that question doesn't work because I'm not so committed to being in the House of Lords.
Well, then you'd be
you wouldn't have to chop a head off. I know, but it's just that if it mattered to me, this is a different question. If you said to me, if they randomly chopped a head off of something I really passionately believed in, it would at least be a challenge to my whether I'd be brave or not. Because, I wouldn't risk my head for the House of Lords because I wouldn't risk anything for the House of Lords. Whereas if you said, would you...
So you'd strongly disagree then?
Yeah, probably. But probably. But it's not, it doesn't mean
Well, what
much.
if every year they chopped a finger off of one of the members of the House of Lords, I would want to be in the House of Lords.
Yeah, but it can't be the House of Lords. I don't want to be in the House of Lords now, so we don't need this.
Okay,
I'm reluctantly in the House of Lords because I saw it as an opportunity to have a political platform. But God knows, if you got rid of me tomorrow, it'd be the least disturbing thing in my life.
The country of England would benefit if I retired from the House of Lords tomorrow. Disagree.
So I disagree because I try and use my platform there to say things. But I could go and get another platform. It's just like, if you got kicked off Twitter. I have the opportunity. It's not like, I think that I make an effort to make a difference in the House of Lords, but I do that wherever I am.
And I've heard, I'm not just, blowing smoke, but I've heard that you've done remarkable things.
I haven't done remarkable, but I'm an unusual member of the House of Lords, and I say things. So yesterday, I made a speech about the King's Speech.
Oh, about smoking?
No.
Oh, but which one?
I could have done the smoking one because that was ridiculous. No, it was just a part about the media bill, but I used it to make an argument about why the BBC are no longer acting as a public service broadcaster. And I used examples around the Israel-Palestine point and also around critical race theory and young people, which they're pumping out in their issue. And I also talked about the way that the anti-Semitism that was openly being expressed on the streets of this country was being ignored by the mainstream media and picked up by citizen journalists. And the only way you could know what was going on, and I know. So why did I make that? Everybody else is in there doing these kind of very straight-laced speeches.
Yeah.
And I used my 7 minutes to make those kind of points. And because it was in Parliament, it's not as though anything will change, but it causes ripples. People get to know about it. People know you've said it. It's embarrassing for the BBC that I said it in Parliament rather than if I said it to you here. So I used the position that I have in the House of Lords to make points that I think are not being made in the seat of power. I'm only a minor figure.
Are there cameras in the House of Lords?
Yeah, so the film is now on social media because I promised that when I do that. That was an example. So when I speak, I try and do that. And then I always promised when I went in that I would put everything on social media because I wanted to be accountable. And the House of Lords never had that. And I've now created a fashion, by the way, because now lots of members of the House of Lords put their films out on social media before it was like they were talking internally.
Yeah.
Whereas I kind of always do a speech that's, I'm talking to you, but representing, or not representing, but on behalf of trying to say things that are not being said in the public sphere. So I'm using that as an example because I think everyone who's got a platform or a public platform, the only reason I took up this House of Lords thing was because I'm a public figure. I do a lot of media. I've been cancelled by a lot of the mainstream media. I was part of the mainstream media. I did BBC all the time. I do BBC very little now. And I wanted to find ways that I could make the arguments for free speech and against cancel culture and all of the things I care passionately about in as many ways as possible. When you get offered, somebody says you want to go into Parliament and do it, even though it's a fusty old place where you know you're a backbencher, nobody cares what you say. I thought, I think I can use this to give myself a different kind of audience and platform. That's why I did it.
Interesting. Social media has been a net positive for liberal democracy. Oh, really? Interesting. I wasn't expecting that. Why do you agree? And I'm going to disagree. Why do you agree?
Because actually, social media has helped create a sense of solidarity and community that is quite surprising. So I've just given the example of the citizen journalists going out on the streets. And that's allowed, a lot of people wouldn't know that if the BBC says, oh, huge demonstration, pro-peace, pro-Gaza, pro-Palestinian, what's there to see here? And the only problem is these far-right people over here, right? If you hadn't got these citizen journalists going around going, yeah, but look, I've just interviewed someone who said Hitler knew what to do with them. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, I saw that clip.
Yeah, but we saw that clip. We all saw that clip.
Yeah.
And that was just somebody I know interviewing a man, right? And at the very least, you start saying, well, who's on this demo, right? It doesn't mean everybody on the demo agree, but that's not the point. Anyway, the main thing I'm saying is social media facilitated a different narrative. Now, it can distort the narrative.
All right, I'm moving. That convinced me.
Yeah, it can distort the narrative, and it's a cesspit, and we know that. But also, I found gender-critical feminists in this country have found each other on social media and have been able to mount a campaign on social media to ensure that we all know what's going on, exposing things in institutions. It's given the powerless a voice in a way that even though X drives me mad, I kind of, routinely get somehow shadow banned or whatever, and then I suddenly bump up again. 1 minute nobody can see me at all, and then I kind of have a bit of and then I'm down again. And that all goes on. The whole thing is horrible. I get so much abuse on there all the time. I mean, not regularly, but I will often be trending, and it's usually because they're saying, get her off, we hate her, she's a fascist and all this. Well, that goes on. I hate it. I take it personally, even though I shouldn't. Despite that, it's an overall net good for liberal democracy, and for me, and for building movements.
All right. In general, citizen journalists are more trustworthy than the BBC.
Right, okay. Maybe even neutral, slightly. No, slightly disagree.
I slightly agree.
So, it depends on the topic. And I am a great advocate of public service broadcasting, great journalism, proper documentaries done in depth. The BBC has a fine tradition of that and has done that. It's on certain issues, and this became apparent in this country around Brexit, and because I was known as somebody who supported Brexit, this is when I got cancelled first, that was what happened, was that I couldn't believe that fellow BBC people were so contemptuous of anyone who was about to vote in a referendum that was called by a Prime Minister who just legitimately decided you'd vote one way. And they immediately thought that you were a racist, backward. They basically talked about the British working classes, knuckle-dragging Neanderthals, that's a quote. And they had this sort of concept, it was like the Trump thing, except it was like the attitude to Trump voters, the deplorables. The BBC could not stop its contempt for the deplorables in the UK context from oozing out of every pore, right, on news. But that was on that issue. They've been terrible, in my opinion, on the Israel-Gaza issue. They do not understand that they are completely bought into the whole woke stuff, and I hate using the word woke, but they can't believe they don't even recognise that they've done it, so they think they're neutral. I still do not want to get to a point whereby random people going around interviewing people is considered journalism. Right. It's a great step forward to have that interview, but I do want verification for things. I don't want to just kind of be reliant on somebody who's a photographer who's now started filming so I can know what's going on. I want the journalists to do their job. And I want to see all sides, by the way, because the other thing is, you know, I can live in an echo chamber too. You know, I don't want to be dependent on the Israeli Defense Force for my information in life as it happens. I prefer to have a sort of more rounded view. That's just to use that example. Yeah. I want to be well informed and well sourced, well-financed public service journalism can be the most valuable. It can be a great thing to celebrate, but I wouldn't criticise the dissident citizen journalists. I just don't want to be dependent on it.
I've been asking you questions for over an hour. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah. So anything. Yeah. So one of the dangers, if you want, on when I say our side, I say that liberally, on the anti-cancel culture side, is that some people become radicalised themselves in such a way that they go mad, but that they actually become intolerant, people who want to cancel the other side, who use the tactics of the other side. Just I don't know how to pose it, but I mean, what do you think? I mean, is that? I mean,
I strongly agree that that's happening.
Yeah.
And I'll also, one of the questions I was going to ask you is that the anti-woke space has become an echo chamber, and I was going to stand on strongly agree to that.
I'd say agree.
Yeah, I see a lot of danger in the. I'm like you. I'm hesitant to say the anti-woke space.
Yeah.
Much of the anti-woke space is becoming a Christian nationalist space. Much of the anti-woke space is becoming, again, like you, I agree with you. It's adopting many of the tools, the authoritarian tools of the woke.
Well, it's also become a checklist. I mean, I think one of the problems we've got politically at the moment is that many the young, particularly, I'm particularly interested in younger generations, and many of the young people, I recognise, you know, from being 19, 20 or, you know, what have you, you know, if somebody says to you, do you want to be a bigot over there or do you want to be a rebel over here? You know, I mean, you're a bit odd if you go over there. Right. But as it happens, the bigot ends up being, you know, somebody who supports gender critical views. Right. But nonetheless, you just kind of have this rather black and white conception. And certainly when I was young, I was then encouraged to read and think about these issues. Whereas actually at the moment, things are confined to a very black and white space. You know, there's a list of good, you know, this, if you're on the good side or you're on the right side of history, you agree with this. If you're on the wrong side, you agree with this. You know, that's what it's like. It's a completely mindless and authoritarian, actually, because it removes your capacity for judgment at all, right?
Correct.
The problem with the anti-woke side is that they can do the same.
Yeah? They are doing the same.
Yeah, well, they are doing it in some instances anyway. Not, I mean, you know, it's quite a big space, but I definitely agree that there are instances. You said Christian nationalist. I've only seen one example of that recently, which we discussed off camera, but I actually, that's not particularly what I'm worried about. I'm more worried about a thoughtlessness that sort of goes, oh, you think this, you've got to think that. Or if anyone who basically just call people snowflakes and just, and it's like a sort of, as thoughtless, right? It's just as superficial. It's not got the depth. I'm not saying you have to go off and read a book on every single subject.
No, for sure.
Not one book, but it lacks, it's almost identity politics.
I agree.
It's my identity is I'm an anti-woke where I'm going to get rid of all those snowflakes and they're all, it's like, oh, very helpful, you know what I mean? Yeah. And I hate it. It's a great threat to those of us who are trying to positively build a robust defence of freedom and free speech.
Like Helen Pluckrose.
Yeah.